Thanks. Good evening. Before we call the meeting to order, I just wanted to remind everyone, this is just a regular Planning Commission meeting. We're going to go through the agenda. There will be some discussion at the Planning Commission. As noted in the agenda, there will be no actions taken tonight by the Planning Commission. This is not a public hearing. We will not be taking citizen comments tonight, depending upon the path forward on the issue that I'm certain all of you are here for. If there is an ordinance drafted in the future or revised in the future, there will absolutely be a public hearing. So that'll be your opportunity to speak in public on that. So with that, call the meeting to order. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the minutes. Any comments? That's
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 3, communications, still none. Tim, Dan? Okay. Item 4, unfinished business, none. Item 5, new business. Linda Haley, agent for Green Hill Preservation LLC, owner, Ray, consideration and possible action on a request for approval of a sign on the barn at the southerly farm operation of Gwen and Hill, located at N3 W29350 Bryn Drive. Tim?
All right, you all have my report and the document that they have sent. All they want to do is place basically a round sign on the existing barn that they have there to identify the Gwen and Hill farm. This is, when we call it the south farm, they have the north farm where we've already approved a number of signs. This is the one that's got the south farm. We did approve some smaller signs for their little stand that they had there that they sold some of the organic vegetables out of. And so now they're asking for something permanent on the garage, or on the barn there. It meets all the requirements. It's way below the allowable square footage, mainly because they have substantial frontage along the road there. My only recommendation is that it doesn't state Town of Delafield on it, so I'm suggesting that that be added in some way to this sign. I don't know if they're here or not. Oh, there.
You okay adding Town of Delafield to the bottom of the sign?
I didn't select that at first simply because it is just basically our logo.
Right.
I'm not sure how I would do that, and if the Town of Delafield would have a recommendation for the size that would be attached, and I'm assuming it would just be horizontal, located below the circular logo.
Yeah, I think we'd be fine with, and the size isn't that critical. Certainly doesn't have to be any bigger than the wording in your sign. And you could just have it as a straight across the bottom below it, I think. I don't.
That's acceptable.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I was just curious if there are other signs in the vicinity that had the Town of Delafield on it, if we were gonna
I think we added it to the code as a requirement
Yeah,
for
we did,
signs, so
so.
it's not really an option not to, I think, anymore.
And if they're gonna do it, they're willing to do it, so.
The other farm does have a monument sign out front that does have Town of Delafield on it, but that's still a ways away.
Right, that's what I was thinking, that these were the same spot, so. If there's no other discussion, I'll make a motion to approve the signage as proposed with the addition of the Town of Delafield being added horizontally on the bottom of the sign as presented.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
I have one comment. So one other option too, instead of it being horizontally underneath the sign, would also be just the inclusion on the sign and moving up the lettering, organic farm. That may be easier. So I would like to present that as an option if their sign company having it on this sign instead of on a sign underneath.
Yeah, I think given that this sign is their logo, they probably don't want to do that, but we can give you the option to do it either way. I don't think.
You're right, sometimes the sign companies say, oh, it's a round thing, now it's not round, and they have some issues. Thank you for that, we'll see what they say.
Willing to amend your?
I would be willing to amend my motion to give them the option to, at the discretion of the sign company.
Okay. Who's second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 5B, Thomas Family Properties, Ray, presentation and discussion of site layout options for the Thomas Family Properties.
Good evening. My name is George Irwin. I represent the Thomas family. I've been coming here now for 3 years, so I'm pretty sure everybody recognizes me. I do real estate development in southeastern Wisconsin. I have for a long period of time, and I've worked hard on this project, and I want to see it to a successful conclusion to the satisfaction of all of the participants, all of the stakeholders. The process is obviously something that is not necessary to be repeated. I think everybody knows what's gone on in the past. We've gone through, the work group, et cetera. To put us in perspective where we are now, at the last Plan Commission, this matter was recommended as a ordinance to the village board. No action was taken by the village board. That ordinance that was approved by the Plan Commission had significant issues with it from a number of points of view as far as the citizenry was concerned, based on comments made at public hearing. Most of those concerned land use, density, and noise and other things that are easy to address. But the biggest issue, I think, was density, and many of the comments that were made were frankly a misinterpretation of what could be achieved. And while you set high density requirements or parameters within an ordinance, what can actually be achieved is important when you put the overlay of primary environmental corridor, open space requirements, minimum lot size, road layouts, tree preservations, parks, all of those kinds of things. And so while people talked about 600 or 800 units potentially being achieved, we knew that that number was something that was less than that. And so we've been trying to, while there's been a number of developers who have approached us about this property and what interest they have, we wanted to at least have an opportunity to present to the Plan Commission alternative site layouts that are based upon practical limitations of the site and what could be achieved within the four corners of the ordinance. The idea being that having a realistic view of what could be done in this project with real world experience, actual projects that have been built in and around the area would make a lot of sense, so that we could see what kind of vision could be achieved with this project. The backdrop of all that obviously is what if we don't do a master plan? What if we threw the ordinance away and we allowed individual property owners to develop their property individually under your existing zoning code? Your existing zoning code has, R2, R3, R1, and how do those zoning code parameters address this property as individual sites? And so the Plan Commission, as embodied here, we're looking for guidance from them in terms of what they want to see done with this property. As a community, do we want to see this project developed master plan? Do we want to require a developer to do a traffic study? Do we want to require a developer to do environmental investigation? Do we want to have water brought to the site? Do we want to have a water study? Do we want to have a stormwater management plan? Do we want to have all of the parameters of your ordinance and a master plan? Do we want to mandate a park? Do we want to mandate paths? Or are we going to allow individual parcels to be developed? What makes the most sense to the community? When we burden it under this comprehensive ordinance, there must be a trade-off, and that's what we're looking for from both the citizen input as well as the Plan Commission in discharging their job. If we got R2 zone, R3 zoning, 20,000 square foot minimum lots, it's 2.18 units per unit on a net developable. I have 115,000 acres of net developable that tracks to approximately 250 units. We're going to present a couple plans today that show 300 units, 286 units, and with a mixed-use development, because that's what the ordinance talks about. Mixed use being senior, perhaps, multifamily, smaller component, single family, and condominium. All high-end, all nicely laid out. Senior, maybe you want to have it included in a master plan, maybe you don't. Under existing zoning code, under your ag zoning code, it's a conditional use permit. A senior family developer could come in tomorrow and pursue a senior on some portion of this project by a conditional use request. Do we want to not have that? Do we want to have a comprehensive zoning ordinance? So we commissioned Trio Engineering, Josh Podelko. I'm gonna spout his horn here a little bit. I've known Josh for about 15 years. He's represented most of the developers in the community. He has good visions. He knows what projects work. And we asked him to come, and we spent many dollars, the family, trying to come forward with some ideas and some concepts for the site, with the idea being, what can practically be developed here? We have around 300 units. If you had R3 zoning, you'd get 250 units. Is this 20% enhancement for all of this trade-off from a master plan, does that make sense? Or are we going to scrap an ordinance and let these people simply develop individually their individual parcels? Again, we have different property owners that we are mandating that they work together. And they're willing to try and do that. They've owned the land for a long time. But we want guidance from you. What direction do you want us to go in? What do you like? What don't you like? So that we can come forward and hopefully have a win-win solution for everyone. So with that in mind, I'm going to let Josh go through these individual plans, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Good evening, everyone. Tim, would you be able to, or Dan, put the plan on? Yeah. Let's hope technology works. It's great to be here with all of you. Uniquely challenging and beautiful property. It really is something special and also complex, and part of that is due to the proximity to I-94, the relationship and how it's nestled in this neighborhood, topography, vegetation, everything you know already. But looking at this property and looking at the body of the history of this, there is a definite interest in open space. I think that's probably a fair statement on every level. So as we kind of worked with the family, started looking at this plan, looking at some of the history out here, it was with a mindset of a connected open space. How do we bring different residential lifestyles together, let walkability, trail connections, different viewpoints, vantage points, interaction with the environment really happen in a neighborhood? And we've had a lot of different iterations, and what we submitted to you are really two plans. We call them A and B, with a couple variations with them. There is really a similar theme in them, and some of the similarities that you see as we look at the planning of this property is obviously a really strong landscape and berm presence along Gulf Road. You know, we're talking residential here on a property that really has a wide open view to I-94 and the noise and the sound. And one way we can offset that is by having big undulating landscape berms, something that's beautiful. You know, we can articulate and really change the height and layout of it. And that's really what you start to see on this plan is all the buildings are 100 feet plus away from the right-of-way of Gulf Road, and really trying to kind of pull the homes, similar to what you see at Brookstone Circle, really pull the homes, the condominium homes, away from Gulf Road, from I-94, and allow the separation to happen. Looking at this plan, to us, we definitely, we'd start to look at it in different pieces, and I think we call them areas or zones in how this property is looked at. One obvious that makes sense is the end of Crooked Creek Road, where it really wants to be a cul-de-sac, and, we show a pretty organically shaped island-type cul-de-sac with 8 half-acre lots living up there. Looking along Elmhurst Road, in talking with the family, one thing that we really liked, we liked the existing trees, I think they're oaks, along Elmhurst Road up towards that north end, that we really want to keep those and have those stay as a backdrop. I think they give a great sense as you turn on and off Elmhurst Road. So we show a cul-de-sac coming in there, and we're sensitive to what the landscape and what the home presence is on Elmhurst Road. And one way we can improve that is not really to try to parallel any lots or roads to Elmhurst, but let a cul-de-sac and some curvilinear road configurations come in so that you just don't have a line of homes. You really pull some of the open space in the back of those homes along that Elmhurst Road frontage. And, we show a passive type of rain garden in the middle of the residential area along Elmhurst. And then pretty consistent, a minimum 35-foot kind of landscape outlot, but it obviously undulates and gets much larger. We are providing an arterial trail really through the middle of this property, ultimately connecting Glen Cove Road to the Lake Country Interurban Trail, and have different offshoots off of that. We have each of these neighborhoods can feed into this central trail system. In the middle of the site, it really has a relationship to Gulf Road and I-94, and we have this single family up in the northeast corner that's averaging, although we use 15,000 square foot as our minimum lot, we really do average over 17,000 square feet, so roughly about 0.4 acres per lot. Although we set the minimum lot width at the front setback of 75 feet, we're at averaging about 95 feet of width on each of those lots. And the reason you see that minimum and average totally different in this type of layout and plan is using a curvilinear road pattern. We really have a lot of flared lots that open up and do get wider. So don't let the minimums kind of dictate really how the lot lives and how it feels. But moving into the middle, we like the idea of kind of connecting the neighborhoods with some element of road, but also the trail that I mentioned. In the middle, we, on A and B, have different types of rental residences. A here uses a direct entry garage, townhome style rental residence, and then I don't know if Tim or Dan, if you want to flip to B, it introduces single family build-to-rent type homes in a part of it, and that's something you're going to see more actively in our Milwaukee area. And those they're built as single family, but built with the intention of, it's an alternate to a condominium, to a single family home. And no, site plan B, if you could. While he's pulling it up, what we find in looking at these layouts and these plans is an abundance of open space. The single family has 30% or more of its designated zone as an outlot open space, which is a lot, nearly a third of the area allocated to it. And as you look at these different, in this middle, this multifamily area, we end up seeing green space on the order of 60% or more. So really an abundance, we're at 63, 65% open space. And that's one of the benefits of a multifamily, whether it's the single family build to rent that you see in the middle, kind of on the north side, right in the middle of the project. Right there, thank you. So that area is for rent, but really it's an alternate to a single family type lifestyle. But what we see is this huge abundance of open space and site amenities. We can introduce clubhouse, pool, dog parks, which in this plan, you see that living along Gulf Road behind the berm. And you see it centrally located on Plan A. Again, trying to insulate it into the middle of the development, not any bit of obtrusive to any of the residential on our project, and definitely not beyond the limits of our property. On this property, I like the idea, of a pocket park kind of centrally, and right now we're showing it on both these plans on Gulf Road, middle of the property where the old farmstead is. We have some trees, there's, some remnant, some history that lives there. And it'd be a shame just to clear cut some of the limited vegetation that we have, and on these plans you see, which I think is important to you and to us, that we keep some of this key vegetation as an immediate buffer to our property, to the Gulf Road I-94 corridor. But we have not a half-acre pocket park here. We're showing 1.7 acre, so it can get more use, more function, and being centrally located, really convenient for all our different users, a hub to bring people together. Looking at this plan, on Plan B here, and Plan A, we show condominiums in the southwest corner. And those have four-sided architecture. They're, you've seen that type of development by predominantly a few different developers in our area. This has been widely acclaimed in some very high-quality communities, as welcomed by the neighbors in a single-family setting. So we've developed different projects using that four-sided architecture, that condominium-type building, right adjacent to single-family, and it wants to live much in the same way. It's a really very quiet neighbor. They like the quiet setting. We have to create that here by pulling away from I-94, building those berms, and then with this layout, with the way we situated the homes, we really are bringing the patios into the middle of the property and letting some of the perimeter buildings almost start to buffer us from the noise that we have to the south. In this plan, as we move to the northwest corner, we show an option for kind of high-quality duplex condominiums. These are very high-end type buildings. Typical, on these buildings, a typical unit is a 2,500 plus square foot type footprint. In that plan that you see there, also real life type development and potential here. But you end up seeing nearly 70% open space in just that designated area with the condominium. And that's one of the benefits it provides when we compare it to Plan A, which has single family. And Tim, can you flip over to Plan A? So bringing in single family, we have roughly 16,000 square foot average lots. Their average width is about 82 feet. Average depth is about 200 feet. So very, similar lot depth to the surrounding neighborhood, just a narrower width, really bringing, kind of clustering the community in and around a single area of road, and letting the open space really exist for the benefit of everybody. So we're not trying to stretch everybody out. We want to create pocket, neighborhoods, intentional neighborhoods, and let open space also be intentional and abundant throughout. So with this single family, you see a connecting trail that kind of runs up through the woods to the north, and then also different connections into that arterial trail. Potential for sidewalk on one side of the street to really kind of promote that accessibility and walkability. To generate some of the, I guess I'll back up. Looking at this site, we also have to be cognizant of topography, of bedrock, groundwater, different site constraints, wetlands. And that's all kind of taken into account. The berms can be created through intentional grading on this site. It's one of the benefits of the southwestern area. Actually has a little bit deeper bedrock. We do have shallower bedrock towards the middle of the property, which works really well with how we've laid this out. Stormwater can be done almost in a zone by zone type manner. which works great for phasing. It also reduces the infrastructure. It allows us, through our stormwater, our ponds, our infiltration basins, to manage more on the local level, and let it infiltrate back to the ground and let it discharge along its natural routes. And that's what you see in all these plans. You don't see just one giant pond where we're trying to force water through hills and massive grading efforts. We really want to let the ponds be where topography says they should, where we can safely discharge and be a net positive to the environment. So as we kind of back out of here, you'll see ponds really intentionally scattered throughout and following some of the natural drainage courses, and at least with an eye on where we're discharging to. Access-wise, we have two main access points to Gulf Road, and in laying this out, we used different techniques, both in road layout by different curvilinear road patterns where we are doing that in different intersection alignments to discourage cut through, but really trying to pull majority of our traffic direct to Gulf Road. The Glen Cove Road, really, that entrance is a secondary, probably very lightly used type entrance. And the same really goes for Elmhurst Road. It's, you know, we really have the single family up in the northeast corner, really living almost like a single entry cul-de-sac type development. It just has a backdoor type connection to connect the neighborhoods and for life safety. But access-wise, we do, you know, we have one access to Glen Cove and Elmhurst, two to Gulf Road, and then a road pattern that allows each of these zones to be, you know, to be developed, and we show a likely and potential way. But it does have some flexibility, and that's one of the interesting things as we start to put a framework to the master plan is, you know, you can see that this could be built in a variety of ways and kind of brought to the community on a phase basis where we may connect to the sewer in Glen Cove Road and bring some of that residential in from the west, and do the same up in the northeast corner and connect the sewer that's up kind of along the northern perimeter of this property, and really kind of work our way into the project. So those were the different thoughts that went into some of these different iterations. Would love to hear your thoughts and talk more. Thank you for your time. Sorry if I got too wordy.
No, thanks.
That's great.
I just want to kind of summarize some aspects of this this plan, if I could. Under your existing zoning ordinance, Area 1, 1 unit per acre. This plan shows less than 1 unit per acre. Area 2, your zoning ordinance had 2.5 units. This plan has 1.49 units per acre. Area 3, you had 2.5 units per acre. This plan has 1.98 units per acre. Depending on which of those multifamilies, if you like the larger buildings or the smaller buildings, you're anywhere, the ordinance says 6 units per acre. These plans show 4.89 to 6 units per acre. So it's well below what the ordinance embodies, but that's the practical limitations of this site and trying to build something that we think is attractive and is a good addition to the community. So we welcome your input.
All right. Well, thank you for the presentation. Again, I think this was helpful and also consistent with the need to see something on paper, because we all know when we went through this the last time, we were just throwing numbers around without having any real idea what it might look like. And in doing so, I think the ordinance that was passed a year ago was 409 units, and this one's somewhere now around 300 plus or minus. But thoughts, comments, questions?
Many.
One of the things that they mentioned, because there's these two options for each of the A and the B, and town staff had a meeting last week, and one thought was to take senior housing out of the ordinance and just let the existing town ordinance that addresses senior housing apply. If there were to ever be senior housing, it would have to be by conditional use, which requires a public hearing, and there's a statute already, in the town code for addressing senior housing. That would simplify the overall ordinance and would take senior housing off the table for at least the time being. So that was one comment, but again, anything?
I guess I do have a question. If you could explain, I guess those that are on the town board, exactly how this didn't make its way to the board for a vote. I'm a little confused by that. Just.
Oh, I'll address that. It's been quite a while, but if I recall correctly, last May, early June, the family came to us at the town board level, or me, and asked that we table the discussion of it.
Okay.
While they prepared a conceptual concept, a conceptual presentation of what they were looking for.
Okay.
So we tabled it at their request. They came to us late in the year, early January, and said, we now have a concept to lay out to the town board. And rightfully or wrongfully, I didn't think it belonged at the town board level. If we were going to go back to the drawing board on the concept, I thought appropriately it belonged back at the planning commission level. So we discussed that at the town board member or at the town board, and a motion was made and seconded and approved 4-1, I believe, to send it back to the planning commission.
Okay.
This is not the town board's.
It was at the town board on December 14th.
Right.
At December 14th, information was provided that the family was working on drawings, and there were drawings that were submitted this evening. So I concurred with Chairman Troy at the time to send it back to the Plan Commission and see if they had listened to the comments and the community, and so that's how we're
Thank you.
that's where
Yeah,
we're
that's
at
great.
this
Thank you.
evening.
So I have a question as kind of the new kid in the block, but
Welcome.
but with absent a plan, what will happen, or what could happen with this property? So in other words, it seems, at least preliminarily, that from what I'm hearing, the options are either a plan or it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So I guess I'm trying to understand, absent a plan, what could happen with this site,
Sure.
if it's outside of our control.
So before we started on the zoning ordinance for mixed use, there was a land use change request. The current land use, or the historical land use for the 100 acres on I-94 was commercial, business park. And the land use to the north 40 or north 50 acres was residential. I think the town was the petitioner on the land use change, to change the land use to a mixed-use land use. That was passed by the Planning Commission and the town board and is now at the county. The county, rightfully or wrongfully, I'd argue rightfully, is not going to vote on the change in the land use until we adopt a mixed-use zoning ordinance. So the ordinance that was drafted last year basically is the only zoning that will be allowed on this property. So if the zoning ordinance is passed, then this property can only be developed as a mixed use under a master development plan with all of the conditions that Mr. Irwin indicated, traffic studies, water studies, sanitary, all that stuff. If we don't adopt an ordinance at the town level, our expectation is the county will reject the land use change, which will then revert it back to a commercial business office park land use. The landowners could then come in and say, we don't want a commercial office park, we want residential land use and R3 zoning. So then they would come through a land use and zoning change, both of which would require a public hearing. But at that point, if the zoning was adopted, then each parcel, and there's 5 or 6.
There's three separate parcels.
Three tax IDs? Okay.
Yes.
could all be developed separately. There'd be no master development plan. There, all of the provisions that benefit the town and the community that are in this ordinance wouldn't be applicable in straight zoning. So I think what we heard Mr. Irwin say is, if we don't get this ordinance drafted and properly and passed to the, satisfaction of all interested parties, then the likely fallback would be straight zoning changes.
And then the straight zoning changes could result in simply,
It'll be,
however it's developed.
it'll be developed parcel by parcel, probably. It'll be all residential, obviously. The connectivity of it, what we see here is all the connectivity and all that. It could very well be lost. I don't know. We'd have,
I just want to clarify one thing, is that the land use plan, if it doesn't pass, it is commercial, is business park. So they could come, the zoning has to follow the land use. So the potential would be is that they would come in for the whole 100 acres in the front with business, business park or office buildings on the front part, basically, of that.
And so when you're saying the front part, so on the zone 3?
I would say it's basically about a line that cuts through about right here.
yeah, basically take that
And
one
then-
line.
And
Forward to go for
this
Yeah.
whole area here is, in the land
Theoretically,
use
that could
plan,
be an
it's
office park.
it's business park.
Yeah.
And so that's been that way for well over 25 years, probably closer to 30-some years now, and even before that, I don't know. But that's the potential, because the only way they could get residential is to do a land use plan to change it to a residential land use. And then they can zone it residential, but they'd have to go through a two-step process there.
So for right now, it's commercial, and if that could be business park.
Correct.
And then what about the remaining?
It was for residential.
Okay, so that could still be residential, but then we would lose control over how it looks and it to a certain extent?
We'd still have site plan approval and other
If
approval.
it's a, if
But
it's
it
a,
would be, like, for lack of a better term, onesie-twosies? So would it be a person could buy a lot and say, this is what I want to do with it, without a
The
overall plan?
the
or-
plat would have to be approved.
There has to
So
be a
we would
PUD or
see the
something.
road and the lots.
Okay.
Is it fair to say there'd be less continuity between the three separate tax parcels?
There
Yeah.
could be.
That is the potential pitfall, is what, if we don't do it as a master development agreement.
Understood.
And
And it also creates some issues. For example, if the north residential part developed, there's probably going to be a requirement for 2 road easements onto Elmhurst, because I don't think we could put that many lots on a cul-de-sac. This plan allows the cut through the other parcel to Gulf Road, so the second access is on Gulf Road and not on Elmhurst. So, that's, one of the many advantages of doing the master development plan is we have a greater say on where traffic will go. And as you heard from the presentation by the gentleman tonight, they're really directing all the traffic out onto Gulf Road to the extent they can with their road patterns.
And Tim, with respect to the, if it was commercial, what would the options be for, I'm trying to figure out what the alternatives are.
It's office park only, so it's
Yeah.
basically office buildings. Orthopedic Associates, though, is an example of what could
Yeah.
go in there.
Which one?
Orthopedic
Orthopedic
Associates,
Associates.
just
Okay.
down the road
so
is,
it could be a medical facility. We still considered that. That was in the same land use category. And so that was considered as a office, even though it's a kind of a clinic office, use. The idea of that use is, it's less intense. It's kind of an 8 to 5. I understand the hospital, or the place is, OAW goes 23-hour surgeries and all that, but the idea is it's kind of a 8 to 5 type of operation. We're not gonna get, our land use plan doesn't allow it to be a strip mall. Let's just put it that way,
Okay,
along there.
What we give up, though, is the master development,
yes.
the water study, the traffic study, and the sanitary district study.
And
That's
so
all gone.
basically, so there, and again, this is just to educate me, but and it seems like this is the appropriate form to request, and actually it is the appropriate form. So we lose all sorts of study opportunities, but then it's a business park with residential properties, and then we also lose the ability to control traffic to the same extent onto Elmhurst.
I mean, if the north
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah,
I mean,
if the 100 acres that's commercial were developed as an office park, how that would be connected to the residential to the north is unclear, probably wouldn't be, which just means then the residential would all go out onto Elmhurst. The office park presumably would go out onto
So, because
Elmhurst.
then basically it's for lack of a better term, I don't wanna say
It's two
landlocked,
parcels,
but
yeah,
it's locked so you can't get through
Right.
the business park onto Gulf Road. So traffic is going onto the
The side
artery
streets,
roads.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
One way to look at it is that we're buying a product, and the product is, we're getting all these protections, all this connectivity, these parks and these walkways, we're getting studies, and we're getting a master development plan all at once. And the price we're paying for that, if the town chooses to do so, is higher density along Gulf Road. And the question is the town willing to pay that price? Because keep in mind that if this ordinance gets approved, our lawyers requiring all the property owners to actually sign the ordinance and saying that they accept the conditions of master development plan, the parks, the water study, sanitary, that they accept all of that.
So in other words, if there's the ordinance that's passed, then the people who purchase the property specifically have to say they agree to all the terms that the town has selected. Is that?
Yeah,
what
the
ordinance-
existing-
If they sign the ordinance, they're saying, we're going to follow this.
The existing owners would be required to sign the ordinance, and then it would run with the land. So any subsequent owner of the land would be bound by the ordinance explicitly. So they couldn't come back 5 years later and say, oh, we want to do something different. You know, we don't like the plan. We don't want to do a master development plan. We don't want to do a traffic study. We'd say, doesn't matter.
And
It's-
if there's no master plan, then like you
We're
said,
done.
Ron, there's no traffic study, there's no water study,
There's no
master plan.
connectivity, there's no trails. There may be no connectivity, connecting, between the various sections. We don't know what it is, because we don't have a master development plan. They're developing it section by section. And that's the heart of the whole issue, is the town willing to pay higher density for all these protections? I mean, it's really that level.
Historically, has the town done these tests before?
No,
Water
they've
tests?
never been required.
Okay.
They've never had a requirement for a master development plan for a piece of property this size with this many owners.
And so village and cities generally would do these types of tests versus townships?
I don't know. That's a
Okay.
Tim question.
Yeah, some cities do neighborhood plans, and so they'll master plan a neighborhood, which would be maybe even substantially larger than this. And then that's kind of the basic puzzle, and then people just come in, developers come in and, do their pieces of the puzzle. The town has been blessed by having a lot of developers, especially along the north end, that I'm sure you're familiar with, that has been very cognizant of connectivity and open space and internal paths, private paths, and things like that. And I'm not saying that, there's no developer in front of us now, so we're still trying to, but there are, a lot of communities do these kind of master neighborhood plans, and so that there's some vision that that community can show to whoever wants to develop.
Well, and we went, I think, one step further in that for several of the uses in several of the zones, particularly the higher density ones, we actually set it up that each one of those developments, each one of those phases has to come forward by way of a public hearing. So if when they wanted to build those 6 or 10 apartment buildings, it wouldn't just be a plan commission approval of a site plan, it'd be presentation of a full, everything they're planning to do, landscaping, architecture, everything, and we go through a public hearing on it.
And that's with the master plan.
That's
And-
with the ordinance that was drafted a year ago, would
And if
require
there's
that.
not the ordinance, then what's the alternative?
We don't have any public hearings. After the rezoning occurs, there'd be no public hearing.
And so it's rezoned, and then essentially,
They just bring in a site plan, subdivision plat, and we take it up to the plan commission.
and now, so do you know, Tim, if something like this was done with Pabst Farms? I mean, was there a master plan? I mean, I'm assuming so, but,
I
or
think,
Mr. Irwin, do you know?
I believe there was.
And so, because I know Pabst Farm has been built in stages, and, you know, but there's plans.
There was
parts.
definitely some large-scale planning going on for that. I don't know if they created exactly something like this, but they had some large-scale planning. They have, I mean, so many different uses out there. But I mean, it's a much larger
That's
site
apple
as
to oranges.
well.
I mean,
There's, well, it's true mixed use, right? There's
Yeah, I
commercial,
mean,
there's
that-
all sorts of commercial,
that's
retail.
That's apples to oranges. I mean, this is a truly residential neighborhood. And, you know, I mean, I think the Plan Commission has a certain responsibility to make sure that those connectivities are maintained as the Plan Commission had done, as the rest of the town has developed over the last 25 or 30 years, making sure that the developers who've developed those farms into subdivisions maintain those connectivities, that the town board and the Plan Commission, you know, made sure that there was road connectivity, you know, before, you know, developments happened. You know, and, you know, I am very cognizant of the need for the water study and the sewer study. I mean, this, you know, Lake Pewaukee Sanitary District was designed for, you know, 5 people per acre. You know, so I think, you know, to Commissioner Frank's question, it hasn't necessarily been done before in the town because the town hasn't, you know, allowed such high-intensive, high-density use. You know, when you're only putting, you know, 80, 90 houses on 150 acres, you know, it's not such a, you know, yeah, there's a, you know, you feel a traffic impact, but it's not, you know, like, you know, we're talking, you know, 285, you know, units here. You know, I mean, you know, respectfully, I, you know, wish we had, you know, 3 years ago seen something like this, you know, to put the, you know, picture to what we were trying to do. You know, I think we're a little bit closer, but we're still too dense. I mean, I think, you know, if you go back to my comments at the May 4th meeting, I think, you know, and there's a number that Mr. Irwin mentions in his memo that I think, you know, would be a lot easier starting point. And I'd like to see a bigger pocket park.
And that number you're referring to is 250?
Believe that if you go back to the meetings that we had last spring, that was the magic number.
Tim, back to the requirements for water and sewer and things with other municipalities, I guess you may have the most history or knowledge on that. When a municipality has something where, let's say there's a discovery that the traffic is at a certain level, and let's say it's 20% above current traffic, do the municipalities set a standard? Traffic must not exceed 10% more or 15% more, so then if it were to get to 20%, we say, time out, let's go back to the drawing board, let's lower it back down from 306 to whatever? Or do we just say, oh, that's a neat study, and move on?
You know, to be honest with you, in a lot of cases, what happens is that a development comes in, the community, some communities are very welcoming to some developments, and especially in cities and villages. And so the traffic study really identifies what improvements need to be made to all the roads around it, what the access points to it. So it's more about what the traffic study tells you what you should do so that you're not going to create additional delay, additional traffic problems out there, where you need the signals, things like that, how many lanes you need at the turns and things like that. So it's more of a technical aspect of it.
Okay.
So in a case like this, you know, with this kind of site plan, a traffic engineer could develop what the traffic patterns would be coming in and out of there.
Mhm.
They'd make their projections, and they'd say, well, coming out on Gulf Road, you know, maybe they'll say Gulf Road is adequate, you know, to handle that traffic. But where it comes out of the development, maybe there needs to be a traffic signal, I'm not saying that there is, I'm just saying that's what would
Sure.
come out of a traffic study is, oh, you need traffic signal, and oh, by the way, your entrance and exit at that point would need, 2 lanes in each direction on that. And that is all then paid for by the developer on that.
Okay.
So, and as far as like sewer and water, typically in a city or village, they have adequate sewer and water available for these. And if they don't, I mean, if they're concerned about the sizing on sewer, and same in this case, if there's a concern about sizing, that's why a study would be necessary as a whole. I mean, it's good to have a whole, do the study as a whole development as opposed to a piecemeal.
Right.
I mean, if a developer comes in and wants to develop those 8 lots up on the, up on this end of Crooked Creek, we're probably not gonna do a sewer study.
Sure.
If someone does, comes in on this northeast side here, oops, gotta get my, this little northeast subdivision, there's probably not enough lots to say, oh, we need a sewer or water study. So for each parcel, we wouldn't probably make anybody do it. We don't necessarily we haven't made anybody else do it in the area. Now, I know some of the developers have provided us with like depths of wells when they come in, so we know, or they can tell the people, hey, the wells in this area are shallow or deep, and just get a feel for, how deep they're gonna have to go with their wells. But no one's really done a study to determine, well, do we have enough water or not? And what is this gonna take? So from the sewer standpoint, the way I would look at that is, if LPSD says, well, we don't have some capacity in the pipe, then that pipe has to be upsized so that it can handle the extra flow. All the sewage from this area gets taken down by the lake, pumped through the village of Pewaukee, through Brookfield to the Brookfield treatment plant.
Right.
So it goes a long way, and so the study would tell us, well, how big of they'll have to evaluate the pumps along the way. Are the pumps adequate to handle that? If not, the developer would likely have to pay for that.
Sure.
So without a study of the whole area, but if you do it piecemeal, you're never gonna get that. You're gonna be this, at some point, someone's gonna say, LPSD might say, well, boy, there's the tipping point. It might be the 3rd development down the road, but there's a tipping point where they say, let's do a study, or let's make sure that this is really, is working or not. But for small little pieces, we've never done it. These small little pieces that we've had in subdivisions, we've never really done, LPSD has never really requested that someone do a downstream study of capacity. But this is a large parcel, so that's important too, and that's why we wanted to make a part of this whole larger development.
Thank you.
Mr. Irwin, it obviously appears that it's a trade-off between density and the protections the town would like to see. Assuming it's not gonna be, it's gonna be the middle class of zoning, which I believe is 109, it's not zone 1, it's zone 2.
I can anticipate your question. If you assume R2,
R2.
what would the density calculation be for the overall site at R2 versus R3?
Just so that, for that.
Sure. R3 is gonna achieve 250 units. R2 is gonna achieve around 170 units under your existing zoning code, 165. I'm trying to do the math in my head at 30,000 square, 43,560 divided by 30,000 times 114 acres.
It's 165, it's 165 and 249.
So I'm gonna guess, on.
So we're somewhere,
But R2, R3, you gotta remember something else. You got millions of dollars of off-site to bring water to that site versus putting wells in. If it's an R2 or an R3, I'm gonna put a well in, and away you go. So this extra 20 lots or 20 or 30 density that we're fighting over, the burden that we are imposing is multi-million-dollar. And so the gap that I was talking about, you know, I proposed that you tweak the ordinance down to a density of 325. Mr. Kranek, I appreciate your straight talk. 250 is what I can support, you know, that, and if you want my vote, that, it's 250. I guess I'm reading into it. And so the question is does this family, these individual family units who have their own individual lives, estate plans, et cetera, how are they gonna come together to burden that property in perpetuity with these requirements for that extra layer of density? So it's not an easy question. This was, when it wasn't hard, it was not easy for me to come up with that number of 325 versus, you know, the 175 if it was R2 or R3. So I think that answers your question. Well, Mr. Irwin, if it was R2, it's 170. If we went to 250, that should be good enough for you. I think that's where you're going with it.
I was going in between.
Yeah, okay. So,
Are you assuming you're gonna have to pump in water?
I don't know. Your requirement says that I gotta find your ordinance says I gotta find a water source, a public water source in your ordinance. If you're gonna eliminate that, well, then that's a significant.
It doesn't say public water.
Yes, it does. Read your ordinance. I'm sorry.
I didn't think we required offsite water.
Now, if water is not required, and I don't have to go to the Pewaukee or the city of Delafield, and I can just put wells in to support
Well,
a
that's
residential
the
development.
point of the water study, is to tell us if the deep aquifer can support the wells that are necessary for this. I can't answer the question until I see the water study.
I understood, but the way the ordinance, from our perspective, the way we've always understood the ordinance was do a water study, but we still want you to have a public water source. And I think the words public water sources was baked into your ordinance. And so if that's a misunderstanding, that's a major misunderstanding, and we need to understand it.
That's a misunderstanding
That's not my understanding.
for my point also is, you know, the way that I always interpreted the ordinance was written was, you know, if we can agree to lower the density to a point where the water study shows that the deep aquifer can support the density that's proposed, then we don't need to pipe in water, and we can, I mean, that's why we haven't piped in water to any of the other developments in the town, and we maintain the density, so.
Yeah,
That's a good example of why we need to do some clarification on the ordinance.
well, it says the developer must demonstrate that a private water supply will not adversely affect private wells in the area, natural resources such as, but not limited to. So it contemplated private wells as an option for, but subject to the water study.
Yeah.
And if the water study said, based on the density you wanted, the water study said that would adversely affect the wells in the neighborhood, then the planning commission would require you to get external
Understood.
public water.
Yeah,
So
based
it's-
on the water study.
Excellent.
But the county has told me and us that there's plenty of deep water aquifer. So that's why I initially started discussions with the city of Delafield to bring water in, and then once the county assured me that there was plenty of water, we stopped those discussions. So to get back to my real question is, somewhere between R1 and R2,
R2 and R3.
or R2 and R3 is where it's gonna fall possibly. And but it still is gonna require all the property owners signing the ordinance. At what point does it become impractical for the property owners to accept the restriction of the master development plan and the 3 studies?
I mean, it's the role of the plan commission, from my perspective, to do that calculus for the benefit of the community, and to do that calculus. You know, our number was 325. If you're saying to me it's gotta be 300 or 275, I need to talk to, but that's the input that we're looking for, where the plan commission would amend their ordinance, and this goes up through a public hearing process, and then the balance of the citizenry can speak. You know, we have a multifamily component. If I lose the multifamily component, you know, what's the purpose of going forward here? And so, you know,
let's stay on that for a minute, because
Yeah.
you have 2 elements of the multifamily. You have the northern section, which is rental, but it's much smaller and it's not as obtrusive as the unit, the 6 units along Gulf Road.
Yeah,
What's
the
the
6
impact of taking out those 6 units and making it all the same as the northern section?
Yeah. The beauty of those 6 in front is they're acting as a buffer for the balance of the site. But you're right, that northern section, that's a product that is very well accepted. The affordability of homes in our community versus renting and the preference, the demographics is, that's an attractive product. People treat it as their home, they take care of it, and they're nice rentals. So it's an accepted product that's coming forward. That's why we presented it as an idea.
But just to follow up on Ron's point, on option B, it's 32 of the little ones, but 100 rental units in the 6 big buildings, just so I got the numbers right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And if you go to the second page of that, all that code is provided to you.
Yeah. So most of the multifamilies in those 6 buildings.
What,
These are rentals.
I understand, but it's,
The majority of the density is
but
in those big buildings.
those 6 big buildings is where 100 of the 132 apartments are.
yeah, that's the chart that answers that question.
Well, George, one more question, George. What's the impact to the density if on the medium-density, single-family residential, we went from 15,000 square foot lots and 75-foot wide to, I would prefer 20, but if we just went to what your designer said the average is of 19 and 90, what if we made them all 19 and 90? What does that do to you?
You know, that's a misnomer about the 20,000 square foot because single-family developers could turn it into a condominium style of individual lots. So the better way to look at it is the overall density. That site up there, it has an overall density of less than 2 units per acre. So when you say I want 20,000 square foot lots, you're already there with that, with the open space component of it. It's 1.98 units per acre up there? It's under 2. So 43,560 divided by 20,000 is 2.18. It's already below what you're suggesting.
Okay.
Can you explain the difference between rental residences and build to rent?
I think that's the same thing, same thing.
Okay.
It's,
Well, no, the build-to-rent are the single-family rental homes.
yeah. And the phrase rental homes is the same thing. I think on different plans, it may have been mislabeled.
No, I'm up in the corner. It says rental residence down there. It says.
Oh, the rental residents are townhomes, yeah.
I guess one question for the group is, I guess I had a preference for option Plan B over Plan A, in part because I kind of like the 32 smaller houses as a buffer between the larger buildings and then the condominiums and single family to the north. And I also think it's just a better variety of resident types, if you will. Also eliminates 4 big buildings. Other thoughts on A versus B, or?
I prefer B over A. But
I would prefer B over A. I mean, I think that's similar to like the Sanctuary in New Berlin where they have individual residences. And so I've seen that in other, I know Brookfield has a number of, Brookfield and New Berlin have a number of similar type things where there's a larger building and then they have smaller units that may be 1 or 2 family townhouses. But the Sanctuary comes to mind, and then there's one across the street with that Brookfield Golf Club that has rentals and has apartments and has single families.
Yeah.
I would lean towards B as well, but I'm also hearing, are we getting set at a number of 250? Are we taking the, in the ask here, when we look at these plans, are we also taking off the senior living and having that be removed from what we've previously discussed and just held under what we
Well,
currently
the
have?
development here is for the entire parcel except for the 14 acres in the corner, which will then just be presumably, potentially left out of the master development plan, which, may not be ideal.
Well, but if you're gonna leave any section out, that's.
Yeah, it's across the street from a golf course, yeah.
Yeah, and it also would fall under a totally independent presentation and independent discussion with the plan commission and independent public hearing.
Right.
Comments from the residents, and the whole thing would just focus on that one parcel.
Yeah.
So we should probably subtract it out when we're looking at units per acre then.
Well,
But
it's
what
out
would
of the
But what would the
acreage.
zoning of that parcel continue to be if it's not part of it? Because.
It would have to, I think the zoning would be mixed-use zoning.
Okay, because it wouldn't maintain its ag zoning that it currently has, because it would be too small to be an
Right.
ag zone
But,
parcel, right?
but,
You're right.
Right.
but,
Have to be rezoned to something.
yeah, yeah, and senior housing is a conditional use in every residential zoning district, from A1 to R3. So
So the thought would be to make the whole thing mixed use,
And
and
then-
then if at some point they want to.
senior housing, it comes in as a conditional use.
Yeah, conditional
Yeah.
use.
That'd be a real easy fix.
Are these big buildings, the 16-unit big buildings that, or how big are these big buildings that we're talking about on the front of in Zone 4?
3, 4, 5, 6.
The plan as shown are.
Gotta go to the mic.
They're 16.
13 to 16.
They're 13 to 16. If you start on the left, I think that's a little smaller. And we just wanted to show them more from a massing standpoint, what a 16 looks like. We're looking for input in terms of the size as well.
And so,
If they were 16, if all of them were 16 unit, you wouldn't get 100 units.
They're a 17 footprint right now, and
Okay.
the number of units can be flexed in that footprint. Those are with a lot of.
Okay, so they're 17 unit,
Yeah, they're big.
yeah, okay.
They're probably bigger than.
Mr. Irwin, am I understanding correctly that your, I guess, the ask, for lack of a better term, may be impacted by not having to truck in water?
Well, I think what
Or rights for water?
what I'm looking for is trying to get a consensus, both from a plan commission as well as a village board, about what direction they want these people who have spent tens of thousands of dollars on planning and working together to move forward with their lives. That's what I want. That's my ask. And so the question is, does the village board, what will the village board support? Does it want to have a master plan? What's the density for a master plan where all of the, because when you master plan, you're asking a very select few of developers in the community to spend a lot of money for all of that infrastructure, to hold that property for 10 or 12 years in order to actually absorb it, versus individual parcels that they could easily, it's more easy to digest as a developer. And so what's good to me, what's good for this community, is to have a master plan, but it has to have some trade-off. What's the density? And that's what we're looking for input on. We've suggested a number. What is the consensus of this group at a number? That's what we need to hear. And we'll live with the outcome.
No, I guess,
And just for history, we started at 464.
okay, understood. Oh, thank you. No, and I'm just trying to understand the impact of water on the request for numbers. It was a very particular question, and I know it's very difficult to answer a particular question.
Water is, the economics from development on water is not a simple question of, well, now you don't have to bring it off-site, and therefore you have all those dollars of savings. No, that's not true, because I'm going to put individual wells in. It's about the upfront cost of that to a developer. Do I go out of pocket $3 million and try and recover it, or have I built individual homes? And if the individual home is, an $8,000, $12,000 well, in aggregate, it may well be this pretty close to the same number, but it's when it is spent. So it's a more complicated calculation.
Thank you for responding.
Yeah, I think it's good to, Ed, to point out, I mean, we started at 464. I think we approved 409.
It was 404.
404, okay.
Mr. Troy made sure that it was 404. He reminded me of that in the May 4th meeting, so.
the ask is 325, and yet if we're on option B, in my view, the ask is really 286.
And it does not include the 14.7 acres, though, correct?
True.
So,
True.
I mean, hypothetically, if we're looking at this as planning it, shouldn't we plan that 14.7 acres? Because otherwise, we're back to 4 parcels, potentially, we're putting them in 3 parcels into 1, but we're leaving 1 out.
Well, that leads up to a whole discussion of, is senior living, it's structured on a unit per acre? Or is it structured on the footprint of the because senior living is not, and I have personal experience of this with my mother. I mean, she went from let's say, 1,500 square foot apartment, 1,800 square foot apartment, and
Right.
as she aged, she went down and down and down. She ended up in virtually a 200 square foot room.
Right.
And so units per acre are, and Tim, speak up here.
Well, it's not apples to apples, it's, you know, I mean, and I think we've, you know, noodled over the senior housing. The senior housing doesn't necessarily have the same impact on traffic and water and other things that, you know, a residential house that, you know, when you're a traffic engineer, it's what, 10 trips a day, Mr. Barbeau?
Pretty close, yep.
Yeah, I mean, you really just have the workers and the sanitation folks.
Well, in the 464 and the 404, apples to apples, didn't include the senior housing
Correct.
units either.
Sure.
So here, and one of the one of the discussion items, because I went through the minutes from last March, April, and May,
You say fights.
was, you know, how many of the zones would have senior housing? And originally, it was all 3 zones that face the interstate were going to have senior housing. And with this concept plan, it's only one part of one of the zones that might have senior housing. So again, to me, that's, it reduces how much senior housing there can be, because there's now only one small parcel left available for that use. And if they didn't do senior housing, they'd have to come back with an amendment to the master development plan, and we'd start all over. I mean, and it, you know, so if they wanted to add another set of condos or something in that section, because there was no demand for senior housing, you know, that would have to be addressed at the time.
Yeah, Tim, just to put it in perspective as far as the code goes, we talked about this conditional use. The conditional use code does not state a density for senior housing, or we call it elderly housing at the time, but, you know, and so most of that is just based on the site, you know, so what's the site and what can the site handle? And a lot of communities do it that way, so, and it depends on the development. And I think that that's the problem, is it's hard to say that this senior development is what would ever go there, because every developer is different. They want to do different things. They have different ways to serve their clients. And some want, I think Oconomowoc has, you know, one place has one larger building and a lot of people, because they have a lot of amenities that they're trying to keep in one, and they don't want people to be walking a long ways. But other places, they spread it out. And so it's hard to really tie anything down, and I think that's why our code gives that openness, and it kind of depends on what can the land handle. And we deal with that at the time that it comes in.
Okay, thank you.
I guess while I got the floor, I just want to mention one thing a little bit about how we got, not really how we got here, but, you know, in the sense of, in the past, we've talked about having this commercial in the front as a buffer to the residential in the back. It's always been that way. And so, and previous plan commissions and boards felt very strongly about not having residential that close to the highway. And that brings challenges, you know. Now we have other, and typically what happens in these cases is that you, as a buffer, then you use multifamily or you use commercial as the buffer. And I think in these plans that are being shown, they've got berms, which absolutely must be necessary. Dan and I were talking today about, you know, we don't want to be looking out the town hall windows to see sound barrier walls through the town of Delafield. That was what the old boards didn't want to see, you know. So we got to do some good planning here to make sure we're not going to get that. And the berm at Brookstone Circle, That's, the only reason that berm is there is because it's buffering the residences from the noise. Before, maybe there was a lot of thought about it, the high-ridge condos that are up on the hill were put in. Now, that's kind of those are 4-family units up there. I think they got like 8 or 7 or 8, 9, I can't remember, but that's a buffer to the single family that's further to the north. So when you're looking at this plan, I think that by having multifamily closer to the highway, behind the berm, is something that we should embrace. And then having the single family further to the north, obviously then it's a little bit closer to the adjacent single family, which is a good thing. But the trade-off is, you know, it could have been commercial, they're on I-94. I mean, we don't want to promote large single-family homes. I don't want to promote large single-family homes along I-94. That's not good planning. We will end up, if we have that, we'll end up with some barrier walls there someday. Maybe I'll be long retired, but it will happen, because that's what we do around Milwaukee, you know, putting these barrier walls that are huge. And so I think we just gotta be cognizant of, you know, we're the Plan Commission, we should be doing some planning for what it could be in the future. I mean, our role is to make a recommendation to the board at some point in time with this code. You know, what's the best plan, you know? They can deal with the rest of, you know, the public input and everything else that goes along with that. Density is always been an issue with every development. We typically determine what the density is, and then we typically have single family. We don't have a whole lot of, we have some 2-family units since I've been around, but not too many. But usually we determine the density based on, you know, the zoning on it. And then the layout and things like that come kind of later. So I know you want to say, well, I like Plan B or Plan A or what. I mean, those plans could be tweaked over time, you know, with a lot of input. I think density or number of units is going to be is the issue to kind of be concentrating on here and see where's the best point. But just want to provide that perspective of multifamily isn't all bad if it's the buffer to the single family that we want it to be something of a quality development.
Well, I think that's a good point, Tim, and I think while we now have, you know, 2 concept plans and drawing stages, they also, consistent with the ordinance that was passed by the Planning Commission last year, you know, they kept the 5 zones in place, and they've got density per zone. So even if the road looks a little different or the type of unit turns from single-family house to single-family condo, you know, the number of units would be codified. So, you know, if we say it's up to, you know, I'll use the 286 for Plan B. If it's up to 286, you know, 45 of those are in the northeast corner, and 8 are in the northwest corner, and, you know, 132 are in Zone 5. So the code would at least restrict where the units get spread around to make sure that the master plan looks something like what we're reviewing as we evaluate this.
So, Mr. Troy, Mr. Koenig, I've got a question for you both as far as where the discussions were at the town board level. I mean, is there a level at which it was?
There were never any discussions at town board level. The town board never had an opportunity to speak on it. It got sent back to the planning commission before the town board ever provided comment on it.
Okay, so there's really no.
We have no direction from above.
We do have an issue, though. And that
Seen
is that-
several.
Agreed. I'm anticipating that the residents surrounding this property will file with a protest petition, which our ordinance allows them to file. And a protest petition, if properly filed, which I'm confident it will be, will require a supermajority vote at the town board level. So it goes from a 3 out of 5 vote to a 4 out of 5 vote.
Okay. But it still seems, unless I'm misunderstanding something, that it's a balance between maintaining this being a planned development versus it being something that could end up being a lot less planned and beneficial overall for the town. I mean, it's a planning issue. and a control issue in
It's a
some respect.
compromise, I
It's a
agree.
compromise.
Yeah, it's-
Compromise
it's-
between density and protections that the town would like to see, or I believe the town would like to see, and I believe are in the best interest, long-term interest of the town, to have the master plan with these various studies and requirements. But it's a compromise, so.
And every development in the town's always been a compromise, so, I mean, this is no different.
And we're not, the way it was put on the agenda, which I'll take responsibility for tonight's meeting, is that it's discussion only, so we're not able to act. So we can act at the next meeting, but it's discussion only tonight.
Understood.
Can I just point out, if it's not abundantly obvious, that these plans were drafted based on the notion that you have to pull water, correct? And it sounds like you want us to provide you a number, correct? So these plans were based off an incorrect assumption that economically you were gonna have to spend millions of dollars to pull water. It sounds as if the feedback is some discussion of lower concentration. It sounds, based on what they presented earlier, they're open to a conversation of lower concentration.
Well, I think Mr. Irwin said that it's, the cost of the water is more a timing issue than a quantity issue. You know, 3 million up front and get.
Smaller bites,
Yeah.
right?
So I'm not sure there's a significant price. And quite honestly, when the water study occurs, we might require them to bring in water. So, you know, we have to be careful about making assumptions that, you know, external water is not going to be required, because we don't know that.
Understood.
So I guess the question for this group for consideration and discussion is, what do we think the trade-off number is?
I think we should all think about it. Discuss it the next one, unless people are ready to discuss it.
Well, I mean, just throw out a number out there, the 250 number that I've been throwing out since day one. The gross net density is 1.82 on the 137.3 acres, which is a far cry from where we started. I mean, the whole neighborhood's at 1.2. And this is ultimately a compromise. It's a compromise between the neighbors, it's a compromise between the board, it's a compromise between the landowners. But I think, you know, I think we can all live with 1.8. I mean, anything under 2 is a win, in my opinion. You know, I know that some of the neighbors aren't gonna be happy, some of the neighbors are gonna always want it to be farmland. But I think, you know, from where we started, and this has been a long process. We've been talking about this property for a long time, a long, long time. And I think, you know, I mean, we all remember the fights about the Aurora Hospital and the Target Distribution Center, and, you know, 20 years down the road, I think we're happy some of that stuff is there. You know, but, you know, initially, yeah, any development is a shock to the system. I mean, I can attest to that. But you do get used to it. I think that there are certain protections in this, you know, master agreement, master ordinance, you know, that I like, which is why I agreed to send it back to the Plan Commission. And, you know, I always liked some of the protections that we had. We can debate till the cows come home about the multifamily, the size, and we can, you know, get into those discussions at another point, but I think you're not gonna see the multifamily unless you're driving down Gulf Road or driving on the freeway because of the natural tree lines. And, you know, I just think that, you know, we've started at, you know, 464, close to 500, you know, we're, you know, if we get down to 250, 1.82, I think that's, I can go to my constituents, the neighbors, and say, we won. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not gonna be the, you know, 182 or the, you know, the 1.2, but I think, you know, we're getting some protections here that we didn't get previously, and, you know, if the family and Mr. Irwin can, you know, compromise on this and come back and figure out how to make it work, and we could figure out how to make it work, I think it's a win-win, and we can put this thing to bed.
I guess I'd like to make sure that these protections that we believe we have, we really understand these protections as the Plan Commission for the future of the town. So I know we know what they are, we know they're in there, but who's paying for them? It sounds like the developer or the landowner. And who are the individuals that are going to be doing these tests? I think it's really important for us to, if that's the only thing we have left if we do decide on a number, to understand if we can go back to the table afterwards because a test didn't turn out the way we anticipated or hoped.
No, that's a fair point. And we did spend a lot of time, obviously, with the ordinance 12 months ago, and we would revisit all of those sections entirely and you know, clean it up and strengthen it as we've discussed. I guess we don't even have to motion to table, right? It was a discussion item only.
Right.
Think about 250 and see if you can come up with a concept that works.
Thank you for your input. We appreciate it as a family. Thank you. And I'm glad everybody showed up tonight so that everybody could hear the honest discussion that is actually occurring. And look forward to seeing you at a public hearing.
Kevin is, yeah, maybe I'll ask. Say, Kevin, is there any,
No direction. We'll talk off.
no
We can have a
direction
staff
to,
meeting.
no direction for the staff?
No direction.
I think we're going to wait.
Okay. Okay.
Item 6, discussion none. Item 7, announcements and plating items. The meeting is still going on, everyone, so you can keep it down. We aren't going to have our next meeting on the first Tuesday because that's election day. But we may need to schedule a meeting on the second Tuesday in April because we've got a cell phone tower that's got to be voted on. So we'll confirm that and get an email out, but.
Yeah, we'll confirm that we'll probably cancel the town board meeting the second Tuesday, and then we'll help move it out as well.
It's a regular town board meeting night. It's a regular town board meeting night.
Yeah, that one's the regular one. The big one's the next month.
I'll email and confirm that, but yeah.
Okay. Item 9,
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
thank you. You missed the first 10 minutes of the game, okay? Sorry.
That was a great conversation.
It was a good